Aloha and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the 9th and final session of Adapting to COVID-19, Indonesia, the United States, and the Indo-Pacific Virtual Forum Series, Digital Infrastructure for E-Governance and the Environment, held with support from the U.S. Embassy, Jakarta, and in partnership with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Indonesia. This final session is also held in partnership with Mula Warman University. Our 9-part virtual series has addressed broad, cross-cutting issues that impact both countries: emerging security issues, COVID-19, regional and bilateral trade and investment, and democracy and civil society. We have featured American and Indonesian perspectives and experts with diverse, yet complementary backgrounds to examine the trajectory of US-Indonesia relations in the new normal. Today marks the final session in our US Embassy Jakarta series. Across the previous 8 webinars leading up to today, we've brought together a diverse group of experts, both from the private and public sector, and have covered a broad array of topics relevant to adapting to COVID-19, including cybersecurity, post-COVID economic recovery, misinformation, and sustainability. My name is Crystal Pryor, and I'm Vice President of Pacific Forum. Please note that this session features simultaneous interpretation. You may access the English or Bahasa Indonesia channels using the globe icon in the bottom right portion of your screen. Our 8th and most recent session on November 2nd concerned e-commerce and innovation. Key findings from the meeting on this topic include that American and Indonesian businesses are vital in strengthening US-Indonesia relations, particularly in the booming data-driven economy. Indonesia has a growing young population and tech sector, which offers a great opportunity for investments and partnerships among IT companies in Silicon Valley and New York City, especially with the impending global talent crunch. Jakarta has developed strong city-to-city ties with other emerging smart cities such as Miami and New York City. Student exchanges and cooperation between Jakarta, Miami, and New York City can enhance collaboration in the tech frontier. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated digital transformation in Indonesia. Online courses have become critical platforms in the growing need for IT skills, which directly benefits Indonesia's young workforce. Indonesia's native unicorns are also on the rise, transforming a wide range of sectors from food delivery, news, payment, insurance, to investment services and finance. The full key findings are available on our website and at the link in the chat box now. Select videos in English and Indonesian from previous sessions in the series are available on Pacific Forum's YouTube channel. The remaining videos and short recap versions are forthcoming, so please stay tuned for these. Today's session will focus on opportunities for cooperation between the United States and Indonesia on developing digital infrastructure for e-commerce and the environment. As the world recovers from COVID-19, democracies face an urgent need to digitalize the operation of citizen administrative services and governance, while also creating inclusive and sustainable digital tools with a citizen-centric approach. In Indonesia, Jakarta and Bandung are engaging academics, tech companies, and startups, and civil society to make greener, safer, and digitally connected cities. Other cities outside of Java, such as Samarinda, are also poised to develop their digital infrastructure for governance and sustainability. A key consideration behind the development of smart cities is how global and regional actors, alongside the private sector, can ensure innovation-friendly business environments and interoperability. This final session of the US-Indonesia virtual series will explore the themes of digital infrastructure for e-governance and the environment with American, Indonesian, and regional experts, including what our countries should do to ensure that technological development in governance is both effective and usable by the general population. Please note that remarks made in today's program are on the record, and a video and audio recording of this session will be made available on the Pacific Forum website and YouTube channel in the future. This event is also being live streamed to the CSIS Indonesia YouTube channel. Also, a reminder to all of our speakers today, please speak slowly and clearly for the interpreters. For those of us just joining now, again, I am your overall MC for the event, Crystal Pryor of the Pacific Forum. I'd now like to introduce Leo Jilk, Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy, Jakarta, to give some brief welcome remarks. Leo, if you would.
Thank you very much, Crystal. Good morning. My name is Leo Jilk. I'm the Assistant Cultural Attaché at U.S. Embassy, Jakarta. Here in Jakarta, I have the privilege as well as our cultural and educational and expert speaker programs like this one in collaboration with our US and Indonesian counterparts. Welcome to the webinar this morning. As Crystal's mentioned, throughout 2021, we collaborated with Pacific Forum International and CSIS to hold a series of webinars about the effects and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, its impacts on various aspects of our lives, and how we can form better policies in response to the changes required by the pandemic. This morning, we hold the 9th and last webinar in the series, and I want to thank Pacific Forum International and CSIS for a wonderful partnership throughout the year and for their support throughout this series. To close the series, we'll discuss something very important and relevant to our daily lives, the shift of governance to the digital sphere, namely through e-government and smart cities initiatives, among other innovations. These innovations in e-government and smart cities were being carried out throughout various regions of Indonesia before the pandemic, with social distancing requirements and the predominance of digital interaction in other areas of our lives. The desire and the urgency for a smoother and more complete transition to digitized government has increased. What kinds of online security and technology are required, and what kinds are available to facilitate this transition? And what are the best practices we see in Indonesia and the United States that we can lean into in the future? And how can we find ways to collaborate more and share these best practices globally? To explore these questions, we have excellent speakers with us today. Idfi Septiani is the head of human resources and protocol for the city of Samarinda, and Biondi Sima is a digital government expert who has worked with many Indonesian leaders, including West Java Governor Ridwan Kamil. Ms. Septiani and Ms. Sima are also alumni of the U.S. Embassy Jakarta's giant and powerful network for young Southeast Asian leaders, YSEALI. You can go to the embassy website to learn more about the YSEALI program. And completing our panel and to share global best practices, Ms. Claudine Lim, Manager of Principles of Digital Development at Digital Impact Alliance, has led many international projects in this sphere, and we're lucky to have her with us this morning. Fitriani from CSIS will moderate the session. We hope you enjoy this morning's discussion and don't hesitate to ask as many questions as you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leo. We now have a poll question for our audience in advance of our discussion. Here is the question. What do you think the biggest challenge to implementing successful e-governance is or will be? Data security, lack of standards, interoperability, or privacy? While we're waiting for those poll results to roll in, I will remind you that Fitriani of CSIS will be moderating today's discussion, which will include feedback and Q&A with the audience here today. Later, participants joining through Zoom will be allowed to unmute their mics to ask questions or give feedback, as well as ask questions through the Q&A box in both English or Indonesian. Participants' cameras, however, are disabled throughout the session. There will also be a post-event survey for our participants to fill out at the end of the event. Now to review the poll results, I will share those with you. Actually quite interesting. Almost everyone said data security, 92% of the respondents. No one responded lack of standards or interoperability. And then we had one person respond to privacy. So quite interesting results. I'd be curious to hear what the speakers think about the data security issue in particular, but I will stop sharing that now. And I will hand over the mic now to Fitriani, researcher at CSIS Indonesia, to moderate the discussion and Q&A. Fitri, if you would.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you, Leo. It's such an honor to be here representing CSIS Indonesia and the continuing and ongoing cooperation with Pacific Forum. Today, this morning, or maybe afternoon on your side, we will do the 3 presentation together, followed by the Q&A and discussion. This is a friendly reminder for the speaker to keep their presentation to 10 to 12 minutes so we can have time for discussion and question later on. The session will be 90 minutes in total. Please remember to speak slowly and clearly for the interpreters. As a reminder, participants may access the live interpretation feature using the globe icon located at the bottom right portion of the Zoom window. Note that participants are welcome to raise their virtual hand or submit question in the Q&A box during presentation. So you can raise your question anytime before you forget. You don't have to save it until the end. Today presenter for our session on e-governance and innovations are first Biondi Sima, the digital government practitioner and consultant, Claudine Lim, manager of principal for digital development at the Digital Impact Alliance. Last but not least, Idfi Septiani, Head of Human Relation and Protocol from City Government of Samarinda. First up, Mr. Biondi Sima. I will read his bio. Mr. Biondi Sima is currently working with the World Bank on digital government research portfolios. Mr. Sima also lectures international relations at Hasanuddin University and serves as one of the board of directors at Cozinde. Born and raised in Palu, Mr. Sima served as one of the smart city advisors to Palu City Mayor and has recently co-founded a platform to improve local talents, competitiveness, and productivity. Mr. Sima has previously led the implementation arm of the award-winning West Java Governor Digital Unit, namely Jabar Digital Service, where he designed Digital Village program, supervised the crisis center, and played a leadership role for the tech and data-driven policy intervention for West Java COVID-19 task force. This has shaped his experience in crisis response and complex program management within the government sector, and he is now handling over 245 projects and 140 partnerships that serve over 50 million population. Mr. Sima holds double master on economic policy and sustainable development from Sciences Po Paris and Peking University, Beijing. Mr. Sima, you may have the screen.
Cool. Thank you so much, Fitriani, for that introduction, and to everyone from Pacific Forum and CSIS Indonesia for having me as one of the panelists. Now, let me just grab my screen real quick. Could everyone see it now? All right, cool. So yeah, so I'm just gonna go over a few experiences that I had with the Jabar Digital Service, as has been explained and introduced as well nicely by Fitriani. But I also wanted to go a little bit of an overview about what is the current state of Indonesia's e-government, which I also wanted to brand as digital transformation and its journey towards digital government. But before I'm moving on, I just wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer that whatever I'm saying throughout this event, it is not in any way representing the views from my affiliation, but it's only from my personal observation and reflection. So moving on to the first part, just to answer why and how to digitally transform public sector and the government. So I think in terms of the basis of digital transformation in Indonesia, we have a clear directives from the president. I think this is a very good starting point that we have, that the President Jokowi has already had this clear vision in mind and has communicated this interview occasions, including building infrastructure, providing talents, building data centers, establishing roadmaps, and also thinking through what are the alternative funding mechanism, because digital transformation is indeed an expensive and a multi-year endeavor. So in terms of the foundation, we have this, but unfortunately, this has not been translated in a coherent manner by a variety of agencies. So as we see right now, a lot of interoperability issues are in place. A lot of the agencies sort of translate this narrative and vision into their own mandates and interpretation. And not all of them are communicating well in terms of the information system well to one another. So we've seen from the user side, whenever they wanted to access public services, not all of them are connected to one another. And that creates a lot of confusion. And from the user side, obviously, it's become more painful to come across just to finish one business, but to have to come across like different interfaces and different applications and different websites from the government side. In terms of the regulatory framework, when we talk about e-government, mostly we will be referring to the Presidential Regulation number 25, 2018, concerning the SPBA, or electronic-based government system. But also there is One Data on Presidential Regulation number 39, 2019, concerning One Data, and there are a lot of some sort of derivative regulations on the side as well. But mostly if you're talking about e-government in Indonesia, would be referring to the PR 95 2018, but also One Data. Now, I just wanted to also clarify the term that we often use and is often mistranslated by the government as well, because when the government trying to digitize itself, usually what we end up with is government trying to move the analog process into the website. And when the business process behind the process of digitizing is not well connected to one another, we end up having a multiple platforms, and the business process is not well integrated to one another. So the journey from e-government, it shouldn't stop there, but it has to move forward to digital government, which means that it's not only the process of digitizing, but also integrating the business process and creating value out of this offering, right? So when the government wanted to solve an issue, they have to think through not from the side of the mandate of the agency who are offering the services, but from the side of the users who are accessing that public service, and really thinking through how is this the experience that the users and citizens would have once they come to the website or the application and trying to solve their problem from there. So I think we really have a lot of work to be done to really push e-government, not just to stop there, but also to have an integrated services across different agencies from national to subnational level. So looking at the example of GDS UK, Government Digital Services UK, so they have a dedicated agency that sort of oversee all the digital services that are offered by the government. And this is sometimes called as cradle to grave public services. And all the public services were offered through digital platforms really designed around life events of the citizens, from the birth and et cetera, education, driving, working, until when they have to access the pension, or even for the families to have the death certificate, for example. So it's not designed surrounding the mandates of the government agencies, but really is designed surrounding the life events of the citizens. And that makes it way easier for the citizens to access government services, and also to foster trust and to improve citizen-state relationship as well. With the time constraint, I think I'm going to skip this part, but this is just to say that when you want to build digital government, you really have to have three components in place. Number one is to have a high-level political support, because without the support of the leaders in that organization, and coming from the highest level, it's impossible to reform the bureaucracy. It's still possible, but it's going to be really, really hard without that kind of high-level support. But that support in itself is not sufficient. You also need to have the infrastructure at place, including hard and soft infrastructure, which also includes the right talents. Because what we see right now, a lot of us know what the problems are with digital government or government not being digital enough, but we don't have the right people who are able to operationalize this vision and ideas. And it's also difficult to attract talents, right, to come into government and work for the government because, you know, there are fierce competition between public and private sectors. And there is indeed a mismatch between supply and demand as well. So talent and soft infrastructure structures need to be in place as well. But also what is not less important is to really show to the public the value of digital government. So when you want to deliver a program, you have to really showcase the functionality of the application, how it can really help solve the problem from the user side, and to really design it around their needs, and to be also, you know, inclusive to a different range of needs and demography and age groups. I think with that kind of support, the government would be able to continue the reform and the progress even when the leadership changes. But now an issue that we have is that connectivity is still very low in Indonesia. As we've seen from my experience in West Java, there are still hundreds and hundreds of villages who are not connected to the internet. And according to the research by the World Bank as well, there are still 59% of Indonesian population who are not, 49% of Indonesian population who are not connected to the internet, which means it's almost half of the entire population who still don't have decent connectivity. If you look at it, Papua is certainly the highest part of Indonesia's demography who still don't have that connectivity, but even in places like Bali and Java, still 45% of the population don't have access. And if you look at the reason, it's not only about in existing infrastructure, but also sometimes when the infrastructure exists, when it's too expensive, it becomes prohibitive for them to also have that kind of stable connection. So ensuring that infrastructure is in place, but it's also affordable to a range of different social households and families would also be very important for the development to be, you know, empowered and for the communities to be able to have that kind of access and connectivity. Okay, I only have 3 minutes left and I'm just gonna running through just a very quick video, I think which I really wanted to show on how we use digital tools for leveraging, you know, sustainable development and to really think through how this can offer values to the citizens at large. Is the sound okay?
Jika teknologi masuk desa secara merata, bayangkan berapa kali lipat produktivitas warga dapat meningkat. Bayangkan berapa kali lipat produktivitas warga dapat meningkat. Jangkauan pemasaran produk usaha desa bisa makin luas. Tak hanya ekonomi, sektor lain pun bisa maju. Akses pendidikan tak berbeda dengan di kota. SD maupun unggul bersaing bahkan di tingkat internasional. Jawa Barat, provinsi dengan populasi terbesar di Indonesia, wilayah total lebih dari 5.000 desa. Dengan potensi desa yang begitu besar dan pemanfaatan teknologi yang tepat, kami yakin warga bisa terwujud secara inklusif. Menghadirkan infrastruktur internet ke desa saja belum cukup. Perlu dibarengi dengan literasi digital agar warga terbiasa dengan teknologi, bahkan merasakan manfaat. Jabar Digital Service punya misi, digitalisasi untuk warga desa bukan hanya literasi, tapi juga pada tahap implementasi akan diimplementasikan infrastruktur. Inilah program Desa Digital. Program peningkatan produktivitas dan kemandirian warga desa secara berkelanjutan dalam pemanfaatan internet desa. Bersama para mitra, pengembangan potensi desa dapat optimal. Dibantu dengan pelatihan literasi digital bagi para kader desa, kini lewat pemanfaatan teknologi desa digital telah berbagi dalam meningkatkan produktivitas petani ikan lewat pendampingan dan mendorong efisiensi dan efektivitas di sektor pertanian. Hadirkan telekonsultasi bersama dokter dengan mudah dan aman, pelatihan penggunaan media untuk meningkatkan kualitas sumber daya manusia.
Awalnya sih saya juga punya pikiran dulu ya, negatif dalam arti kan pakai alat ini atau satu paling ya nambah-nambah biaya, udah ribet penggunaannya, harus ada listrik, harus pulsa juga, harus belajar HP Android juga kan aplikasinya.
All right, I just have to pause that video, but I'll circulate it through the organizing committee for the audience to really see the complete video, and it's also available on YouTube. And just let me just wrap it up with this slide right here. So I think infrastructure really is the baseline that needs to be worked on from the government side. And there's still like a huge problem in terms of infrastructure when it comes to like Indonesia's landscape, but that alone is not enough for the digital government to thrive. Literacy definitely has to be cultivated in parallel, and the use cases of each of this has to be piloted, and it has to be visible for the society to really reap the benefits of digital government. It seems to us that there's still a lot of homework needed to be done by the government, but we're also optimistic, provided that the president has already given its strategic directives, and we do have a good starting point, especially because of the COVID-19 momentum. But still, there are still a lot of government agencies who would really need to up their ante from moving away from e-government to digital government. And with that, I would like to hand it over back to Fitriani.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sima, for the informative presentation. You show us how and what it takes to digitalize the government, and what do we currently have that shows the gap or the challenges that we have in Indonesia that we need to address. Thank you so much for that. We move to the next speaker, Ms. Claudine Lim. I will read her bio. Ms. Claudine Lim joined the Digital Impact Alliance, or DIAL, in October 2017, shortly after receiving a dual master's in public diplomacy from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs and S.E. Newhouse School at Syracuse University in the US. In her role at DIAL, she shapes and delivers digital principal strategies, oversees communication efforts, and enables the digital development community's capacity through the adoption of good practices and collaboration. Ms. Lim facilitates partnership between funders, implementers, governments, and global actors to achieve greater collective impact. Ms. Lim, I give you the screen.
Thank you, and I do believe someone is helping share my screen. Excellent. All right, so just based on the intro, thank you for that. I work at the Digital Impact Alliance. We are hosted at the United Nations Foundation in Washington, DC. And my team works with a range of global actors to actually accelerate national digital transformation and responsible data use. And we're currently researching the factors that really drive those things. And this panel is actually quite serendipitous, as I'm currently in Sierra Leone with several of my colleagues who have been working with the government of Sierra Leone to build their digital capacity with the aim of building a digital economy that leverages things like data and technology to stimulate growth across all the sectors. So I was actually quite energized by the last presentation, because a lot of what he was speaking about building infrastructure really speaks to a lot of my work and a lot of what I'll be touching on today. So my presentation will kind of zoom out a bit and look at some of the foundational standards that are needed to create inclusive and sustainable technology with a citizen-centric approach. And you can go on to the next slide, please. So as Crystal mentioned, the pandemic really instilled an acute sense to digitalize governance and services like healthcare delivery, food, agriculture, what have you. But in order for governments to deliver these services well, technologies really need to be designed for its users, in this case for governments, for its citizens, and need to be built on a base of reliable and interoperable systems. Resources also have to be allocated efficiently, and decisions really need to be made by secure data. So as I mentioned, my team is working with Sierra Leone's ICT ministry to strengthen their digital capacity and literacy and look at how we can revamp their infrastructure. And that's really an abridged version of what we've been doing. There's quite a bit more that goes into it and more research that needs to be done to determine the main drivers and variables of digital transformation. So instead, up on the screen, you will see the 9 principles for digital development. This is the portfolio I oversee at my team, and we'll also be looking at like some ways that we can apply it. And I'd like to point again to Biondi's presentation, because as you read through these principles, he pointed actually to a lot of them when he talked about integrating business processes. We see the reuse and improve principle when he talks about, solutions being fit for citizen standards, affordability, designing for citizens. That's the design, the user principle. We see funding. He talked about funding mechanisms, building infrastructure, that's building for sustainability. And a lot of you at the beginning of the presentation said like things like privacy, security, data are really going to be like some of like the main considerations. So as you look at the principles, sort of thinking about how these considerations can help drive building up the government of Indonesia's digital capacity. So you can go on to the next slide, please. So although the digital principles have historically been used as a framework by international development actors like implementing partners, nonprofits, and donors, we've obviously been exploring a ton of potential for those digital principles to serve as a North Star for country governments. Not only to help the governments lead from the front by becoming more digital themselves, but to also ensure that their digital governance and services are effective and usable by the general population. So up on the screen are some of like the recent commitments by Indonesia to integrate digital programs throughout their public services to cater to the needs of the urban population. We see things like sorts of e-governments, so finances can be managed through online-based systems, smart city technologies like command centers or smart surveillance and monitoring systems, other systems where you can have other cashless financial transactions for loans, business planning, and other banking services. But I'd like to take a step back and, like I said, kind of focus on like a singular use case and how the principles for digital development can specifically apply to them. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So if we were to talk about, cashless financial transactions, we would look at like the design with the user. What are some thinking that, how could that guide the thinking of governments? So citizens, their users, who are going to be using the apps? What are their literacy, access to phones in the areas that they're trying to render this service, demand for mobile services? Banks could also be considered users. Which ones are they going to partner with on these programs, and will they be incentivized by more customers? They'd also maybe work with mobile network operators, and designing with the user is also an iterative process. So do all these stakeholders, even the ones I haven't mentioned, do they have the opportunity to provide feedback throughout the program and continue to improve it? Next slide, please. Understanding the existing ecosystem would also be another one. So although we're talking about Indonesia's context, from region to region, it can look very different. So looking at network connectivity in rural districts, how many mobile phones might exist in a single area, and how many users have access to a single phone? And are there better ways to approach banking services that might be preferred by the citizens that might not necessarily be through mobile apps? Next slide, please. So again, talking about addressing like privacy and security, how is banking information private? It can be very risky to manage. So how are we ensuring that data is being responsibly stored, collected, shared, and destroyed appropriately once a user decides that they don't want to use a service anymore? There should be questions about how to protect and encrypt user data in mobile apps. Again, how to limit access to the information. Who really has to know what information, what needs to be stored, and how is it shared through like interoperable systems? And can users elect for information to be stored, and can they opt out of like certain processes? Next slide. And I think like the biggest one is like the infrastructure piece, right? The Build First Sustainability Principle really looks at factors like how to identify alternative resources for funding in the long term, how you build for partnerships between like governments, the banks, the private sector, and other actors, and capacity building to manage information, technology updates, upskilling workers, et cetera. So these are just a few examples of how the digital principles can really guide governments' thinking as they start to digitalize their programs and their e-governance services. Next slide, please. And so I'd really like to wrap up my presentation by just acknowledging that the digital principles have become a core part of how we understand responsible digital development practice, but they don't really cover everything that we know to be good practice. And their design focus at the project level can mean that they miss even important longer term or systemic considerations. And because Indonesia has one of the fastest growing digital economies in Southeast Asia, action is really needed to ensure that all citizens, especially the most vulnerable, can access various digital technologies and services and realize the benefits. So a lot of like the key, takeaways really echo my colleague Biondi's. And I was pulling from a very interesting World Bank report. So, in order to really roll out, the most effective and sustainable solution possible, this report really emphasizes 3 policy priorities that captures like the essence of the digital principles. The first is to boost digital connectivity and universalize access to high quality internet. And that includes like improving clarity of regulations around sharing of telecom infrastructure and just addressing the digital divide generally. Second priority is just to ensure that the digital economy is really there to work for everyone. And this can be supported by better logistics, greater investment in relevant skills to allow youth and all citizens to be prepared for the digital era. And the third priority is using digital technologies to provide better public services, improve the quality of citizen and state interactions, and really build trust in the digital world, just to make sure that the most vulnerable populations are protected and they can actually leverage the benefits of technology and risks can be mitigated. So in sum, my presentation is really advocating for the government to lead from the front and become more digitally literate itself, address the digital divide through the connectivity gap, but also to ensure that citizens develop the skills to maximize the new opportunities. And so digital principles, focusing on these 3 key priorities is really critical to creating an enabling environment to address challenges in regulations, in the business environment to allow for a competitive but effective innovation-based system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lim, for your presentation. That is very informative, and I learned a lot about the principles for digital development and how and what can we assess first and consider before we digitalize the government. Very, very useful. Thank you so much, Ms. Lim. Last but not least, we have Idfi Septiani. Ms. Idfi Septiani is head of Human Relation and Protocol for the city government of Samarinda. Previously, Ms. Septiani has served as the head of Information and Communication Technology for the Department of Communication and Informatics and participated in the internship and program with both the city government of Northampton, Massachusetts, and the municipality of Amsterdam, Netherlands. Ms. Septiani has earned a master's in state administration science and a doctorate in economy from the University of Mulawarman. Ms. Septiani, I give you the screen.
Thank you, Fitriani. So I will share my presentation. All right. Okay. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Fitriani, as the moderator. So
Excuse me, Ibu Idfi, I could not hear your voice. Would you mind to start in the beginning? I don't know what happened before. We can hear you very clear, but I think there's a disconnection with the mic or something.
Hi, Fitriani. Can you hear my voice?
I can hear you now, so I guess you can do this, but speak very a bit louder. Thank you so much.
Can you hear my voice right now?
Yes, quite soft. I hope you can be a little louder. Yes.
All right.
Please.
So I will start again from the beginning of my presentation. Well, all right. So let me change. All right. So allow me to give a brief introduction. Samarinda is located in East Kalimantan province on the island that we call Borneo or Kalimantan Island, Indonesia. You can take a 2-hour flight directly from Jakarta to Samarinda. We have an area of 71.8 thousand hectares, slightly smaller than Singapore, but 7 times bigger than Barcelona. According to the 2020 Indonesian census, the city of Samarinda has a population of approximately 827,000 people spread over 10 districts and 59 sub-districts. Known as the cultural hub of the East Kalimantan, Samarinda has a diverse, multi-ethnic population with population growth composing 1 until 2% of the city population. And our economic structure is dominated by the tertiary sector consisting of trade, hospitality, restaurant, and services, which contribute to 58.7% of the economy. We aim to empower Samarinda as the center of civilization through the smart city approach. So we are committed to developing a city through the smart city approach and writing a master plan for our smart city in local government regulation. The monitoring, evaluation, and recommendation toward the development of Samarinda through the smart city approach are carried out by the Council of Smart City that was formed by the mayor. Other than that, Samarinda has a technical team who analyzes the requirements for information, solution designing, and harmonizing all supporting information of Samarinda smart city as a smart city. Development planning of Samarinda as the center of civilization will be processed through the 6 pillars of smart city planning approach. Smart environment, smart economy, smart government, smart living, smart society, and smart branding. The Smart City Plus is defined as a concept that strengthens the community to rebranding toward our small-scale industries, the utilization of information technology, and the carbon neutral practices. Good governance makes the development of network infrastructure essential to Samarinda. The development of network infrastructure has been carried out in Samarinda since 2019, along with the development of the data center and the command center, which is conducted by the Agency of Communication and Informatics. Network connectivity in Samarinda has been connected to 290 spots, starting from office to sub-district and going all the way until the mayor's office. Our expectation is to monitor all the public services issues so activities can become easier, efficient, and effective, and the development of vital data can be used for policy making, just like Claudine said about the 3 key priorities. The network infrastructure is the foundation of e-governance implementation. After everything is connected, we create a data platform and several website-based applications such as public service category samarindakota.go.id as the Samarinda City Portal website, and then e-kelurahan for the administration service such as application for the identity card, certificate, and others. And then the electronic signature for authorized officials to sign all government documents, as well as building a data platform, data.samarinda.go.id, and application programming interface, or API, for the interoperability and accessible for any data plan. All of the website, the API, the interoperability built by Samarinda people. We collaborate with the Mula Warman University and Samarinda Startup. Today, we struggle and face a pandemic that affects our economic growth. However, we found an opportunity to raise during the handling of the COVID-19 cases in our city. Samarinda is currently equipped with a centralized contact center called the Samarinda 112 hotline to support local government to handle COVID-19 cases. Even though 2 years ago, this hotline was launched to support the dissemination of information related to safety issues, disasters, and epidemic in Samarinda. It has been a huge help during this pandemic. This hotline was connected to the operator in the command center managed by the Department of Communication and Informatics. It was planned and designed to connect to all agencies in the city government of Samarinda to ensure rapid emergency response on various issues. Hotline 112 is a national program initiated by the Ministry of Communication and Informatics. But this emergency call service is a local service that allows Samarinda residents to be able to connect directly to the hotline operator city government of Samarinda. Hotline 112 has been implemented in 81 cities in Indonesia, and Samarinda as the pioneer for Kalimantan. From 2020 to 2021, Hotline 112 has recorded up to 90,117 COVID-19 calls in 2020 and 8,439 in 2021. The decline in the number of calls in 2021 indicates that the COVID-19 cases are getting resolved. Until today, we have managed to flatten the curve of COVID-19 with the cure rate of 96.51% at the end of November 2021 compared to July 2021 with 86.31%. We can see that from this infographic, in July 2021, all districts are in the red zone. And 4 months later, in November 2021, there are 3 districts in the green zone and 7 districts are in the yellow zone. In addition to that, we are also implementing 5 strategies in handling COVID-19 that focus on improving healthcare and health facilities, strengthening the capacity of personnel and institution of 112, web development. So web development divide in 3 categories: corona.samarindakota.go.id for healthcare, and then bantuan.corona.samarindakota.go.id for the economic impact, and ssn.samarindakota.go.id for social safety net and community-based handler. Samarinda City lesson learned: instead of working in silo collaborative approach that involves a wide range of stakeholders is a key success in reducing COVID-19 impact. Yes, the 112 hotline was a bigger help for us, but if we zoom in to the smallest level, a collective work within citizens is the true power that made Samarinda City survive up until now. In terms of utilizing digital infrastructure in reducing COVID-19 impact, apparently it doesn't mean supposed to be a sophisticated platform or tool. It could be simply reactivating or improving existing infrastructure. What we learned from our journey in addressing the COVID-19 spike as well as utilizing digital advantages, there are no magic tools that made our city survive unless our robust connection and coordination. It also applied to delivering e-governance that is most likely linked to the smart city topic. The system won't work even we have built the most sophisticated machine, but without a talented pilot, so it cannot work. What we have done in Samarinda is not only focuses on the hardware or platform, but also on the back-end process, includes relevant policies that deal with the data management system as well as roles and responsibility, which is collecting, managing, sorting, validating, distributing, updating, and etc. That will be mandated to the agency or operational entities. By doing so, no matter it's a new or old model tools, it will work. It will work. So we can do this together. So thank you, everyone. So this is my sharing session to all of you. So we can discuss at the Q&A session. Thank you, Fitriani.
Thank you, Ms. Septiani, for the informative presentation in terms of how Samarinda government transitioned to use the digital technology, especially in handling the pandemic. It is very informative. Now we would like to move on to the Q&A and discussion session. And we have about 30 minutes or so for question and discussion. We will finish just before past 30 minutes, and I will hand back to Crystal then. Now I want to share how the participant can ask question. you have two options for asking question or making comment. One is to raise your hand in the webinar control accessible from the participant tab. And the other is to open the Q&A window and ask your question by typing your question into the Q&A box and click send. If you raise your hand to ask your question verbally, the host will enable your microphone and ask you to unmute yourself. Now, if that happens, please be ready to unmute yourself. Feel free as well to ask your question in either English or Indonesian, and don't forget to state your name as well as your affiliation. First, we will go to the Q&A section. Raised by Mr. Satrio Santoso, an alumni of the Ateneo de Davao, Philippines. His question is for Mr. Biondi. We have seen that there is a growth and development on the digital village or Desa Digital, but is it equally spread through Indonesia from one end to the other, from Sabang to Merauke? If you could share with us, what are the other challenge beside infrastructure and digital literacy? And how does the pandemic impact the Desa Digital or digital village growth? That's for Mr. Biondi, and I will read the question directed to Ms. Lim. Ms. Claudine Lim, there's a question from Karen Budianta that asking you to provide lesson learned from other countries, because you have been traveling quite a lot, on the principle for digital development, particularly on the principle of reuse and improve, that can be maybe quite useful for the government with a little budget. And I would raise this last question to Ms. Septiani from Ruth Alicia, and this can also be answered by all the panelists as well. So the question is, what concrete measure should be taken to address the issue of silo mentality? It's just like working, each part of the government working separately. And how to address the issue of interoperability to enable government digital transformation across Indonesia, and perhaps Ms. Lim can give example from other countries as well to connect with the question directed to her. Maybe you can share good practices that can be applied to encourage the whole government approach. Now, I will give the first opportunity to answer to Mr. Sima, followed by Ms. Lim, and then followed by Ms. Septiani. Now, I give the screen to Mr. Sima, please.
All right. Thank you so much, Fitriani and to Satrio for the question. Maybe my quick answer would be, if you're asking me if it's equally spread through the whole Indonesia, my answer would be no, definitely. There's a very diverse disparities across regions in Indonesia, and it really depends not only from the initiative of the central government, but also from the local governments down to the village level governance as well. And with that kind of disparity in capacity, it indeed backs the question, how would the government trying to synchronize all these efforts? Because you cannot rely solely on the initiatives given by the local communities as well as the local government. So as much as we want a bottom-up approach in digital governance, I personally think that top-down reinforcement has to be exercised as well. And by that, it's not by some authoritative measures given to subnational government, which is pretty much complained as well by a lot of subnational governments in my experience working with West Java as well, but really bringing into and introducing the standards and alternative financing and giving the supports in terms of soft infrastructure such as talent provision. I think that would really help subnational government and village government to be able to stand on their feet. As I've explained in my presentation, there are three components needed in every public policy setting, not just in digital government. You need a strong leadership, you need operational capacity, and you need also public values as seen by the citizens from that policy. So in terms of digital village, there's still a backlash as well when the citizens are unable to see the benefits of digitalizing the village. So if you want to introduce connectivity and digital program to the village, you have to be able to show to them the benefits that they will reap once they're on board with the program. So our approach in West Java back then is that we sort of wanting to increase their productivity, and there is an increased margin of income that they could get, not just by being able to connect to the internet, but also being able to transact and being able to generate commerce and values from their online activities, because our research also shown only 3% of average Indonesian online activities has productive values. Most of them are mostly for leisure, which is not bad in its sense, but we want more economic values generated from the digital economy and online activities. And if you wanted to approach citizens in the village, you would have to be able to show and to make this case for them. So therefore, they would be excited to not only get on board, but also to sustain their activities over the period of time, because we cannot rely on government intervention solely, because the budget is pretty much constrained and limited. But we've seen actually, just touching base very quickly on the issue of pandemic, yes, it definitely hinders the effort to digitizing the village, because a lot of the budget are being refocused to COVID-19 pandemic management. But we've also seen the potentials of villages are rising throughout the pandemic situation. We've seen that the economic activities in the village, especially in agriculture, is very, I think the number is actually rising during the pandemic, and it's not affected as heavily as other industries. So really looking at the potentials that agriculture and villages offer, and in West Java setting, 70% of the economic activities are actually generated from agricultural activities. And looking at how to make the process become more efficient through digital technologies, I think this is the kind of effort that the government has to step in and intervene and sort of support through investments, but also looking at this sustainability lens of how to ensure that they are being empowered with this intervention, and they would be able to continue the effort on their own, because we are always looking at how we can increase a margin of income and productivity by introducing this digital program in the village. So I think that's the kind of challenges, but that's also one of the ways that we could sort of look at when we want to scale this program in other villages and in other areas in Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Sima, for your answer, and quite frank. I guess that's the challenges we need to face and address, as well as sharing with us the agriculture sector potential that still can be, the government can greatly benefit if that sector digitalized. Now I will move to Ms. Lim on the question of lesson learned from other countries, especially in the principle of reuse and improve, to give you ideas for government with little budget. Please, the screen is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is actually might be an example that came to my mind, and I was actually originally going to include in my presentation. Drew really similar parallels to Idfi's case study. So the example that I wanted to provide here was actually Cambodia's 115 health hotline. And that is a tool that was created by an NGO called Instead. Their iLab Southeast Asia team created a tool, or really adapted a tool during the pandemic that aims to improve disease detection, improve response times, and disseminate public information around health. And so the creation of the 115 hotline was really a continuous iteration with development and testing, where the staff redesigned an existing and limited use hotline into a toll-free interactive voice response line. So like from the start, the Instead team in Cambodia, they really wanted to design a hotline that would be able to scale in the long run, but faced two major hurdles. They didn't have the resources up front, and they needed a full political acceptance, which was really what they tried to get the buy-in during the design phase of this tool. They also conducted field testing and then tried to improve the design of the ultimate product. So they've been working in Cambodia since around 2009, and they had a good understanding of the existing ecosystem, which is one of the principles, which was key to building a sustainable health hotline that would really integrate with the initial human system, picking up calls and what they really hope to achieve. So there are pretty high mobile penetration rates in Cambodia. So they determined that a low-tech solution was possible and would enable all people from across the country to have access to the 115 hotline. So this low-tech solution was also beneficial because it was voice activated. So it was a little more accessible and did not require high literacy rates. So essentially the creation of the 115 hotline was continuous. They redesigned again the existing, a tool that had limited capabilities at the front, and we're able to work with the government of Cambodia, as well as I believe the CDC equivalent, to adapt the tool for the COVID pandemic. And there were a lot of promising outcomes, not only developing a new tool, but bridging gaps in data collection and tracking and reporting from health centers throughout the country to provide accurate firsthand accounts and cost-effective processing of information to help inform health experts and decision makers on the health of the country's, I think about 15 million people. And ultimately, I think, by reusing and improving those existing hotlines to respond to COVID, they were able to provide Cambodian citizens with a resource that was free and easy to use. They were getting updates on, so citizens would no longer be required to travel in wild weather to get to a health clinic for reporting or getting updates on emergency diseases. And now they're using the tool to simply make a phone call to report abnormal diseases and educate themselves on preventative measures. We do have the full case study on this available on the website. I'm happy to drop this in the chat or let me know the most appropriate way to share that. Thank you, and I hope that's helpful example.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lim, for your sharing of lesson learned from Cambodia. It's always useful to convince Indonesian government as well that other government adopt similar digitalization steps and methods that is not costly and can be implemented by countries in the same development level. Thank you, Ms. Lim. Now, I would like to turn to Ms. Septiani to answer the question in regards to address the silo mentality as well as interoperability problem to enable government digital transformation. In your case, perhaps in Indonesia, in Samarinda, then perhaps I will ask later to Mr. Sima in the example of Indonesia as a whole, and perhaps Muslim to give example from other countries as well. Please, Ms. Septiani, the screen is yours.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Fitriani. Jadi terkait dengan bagaimana mengatasi kerja yang sendiri-sendiri atau silo, sebenarnya itu dimulai dari komitmen yang kuat dari pimpinan, mulai dari wali kota, kemudian juga sampai kepala dinas, kepala badan, dan yang lain sebagainya. Komitmen ini penting sekali, seperti dalam presentasi saya sebelumnya, saya menyampaikan bahwa komitmen dari pemerintah Kota Samarinda itu diwujudkan melalui regulasi peraturan wali kota tentang master plan smart city. Setelah dari itu kita membentuk Dewan Smart City. Nah, Dewan Smart City nanti inilah yang berada dalam jajaran pimpinan atas untuk sama-sama berkomunikasi, membahas bagaimana kita harus bekerja bersama-sama. Kemudian ada tim teknis. Tim teknis inilah yang nantinya menjadi pioner, yang menjadi garda terdepan dalam membangun hubungan, semangat kolaborasi ditumbuhkan, dan juga sering-sering ngumpul, kemudian ngobrol bareng, kemudian membahas. Tim teknis itu awalnya lebih banyak mendengarkan apa yang menjadi persoalan permasalahan yang ada di Kota Samarinda, kemudian bersama-sama kita nanti membangun dan kita mulai menginventaris potensi-potensi yang ada di Kota Samarinda. Misal Universitas Mula Warman, kita sering sekali berkomunikasi dengan salah satu dosen di Unmul untuk membantu kita dalam penyelesaian masalah, kemudian juga dengan startup yang sebenarnya mereka kalau kita ajak ngobrol bareng, kita ajak diskusi bersama, kita undang, mungkin kalau diundangnya datang ke kantor, mereka ada rasa sungkan ketika kita bertemunya di luar, mereka dengan nyaman dan dengan senang hati membantu kita bekerja bersama-sama. Kemudian dengan OPD atau dengan dinas yang lain, kita terus melakukan sosialisasi, kemudian rapat-rapat. Memang tidak semudah seperti yang kita sampaikan bahwa 1 atau 2 bulan bisa tercapai. Ini harus dilakukan terus-menerus. Sosialisasi, rapat, dan yang lain sebagainya itu harus selalu kita lakukan. Dan kita berkomitmen untuk membantu OPD, organisasi-organisasi perangkat daerah yang memang membutuhkan bantuan penerapan digital platform. Jadi seperti itu. Terima kasih, Mbak Fitri.
Thank you, Ms. Septiani, for answering the question. Before I return to Mr. Sima and goes to the sequence again, there is a question that is raised by anonymous attendee that on the concern of data centers. We know it is quite a heated debate sometimes. Maybe in Indonesia it is, as the government is planning and prioritizing the development of national data center, and maybe as a consultant or knowing more about this development, what do you think of this? Because there's a debate on the huge investment that it requires and that it needs strong capabilities. And there is also already a concern for data privacy and security, as well as data exchange issue. So maybe this question also connect with Ms. Lim's presentation on the principle of digital development to address privacy and security. For Mr. Sima, the question is like, what's your comment on the national data center in Indonesia, whether the local government will have the local data center and how to have the investment and the capabilities to booster it, whether it's going to be a solution for data privacy or you don't really trust the government to do so. But I know you wouldn't say that. But for Ms. Lim, how do you give suggestion for the government to protect or increase the address privacy and security, especially for those government that just slowly digitalize itself? And perhaps to have the spin for the same question for Ms. Septiani, how does the Samarinda government handle or manage the data in your Samarinda government area, and whether is there any lesson learned on managing the privacy and security that you can share with us? Maybe for the first opportunity, I will give to Mr. Sima.
All right, thank you so much, Fitriani. Before I answer the data center question, I would like to just tap onto the silo mentality question, because this is a very interesting discussion. And I feel like government working in silo is already the nature of the way government works in its bureaucracy. So what I suggest on top of what Ms. Septiani said on having a strong commitment from the leaders, which I also strongly agree in, are two prongs, which I think is also not quite popular. Number one is that we've seen a lot of good examples from other countries that have a dedicated agency. So if you have a dedicated talents to operationalize this vision and leadership into a strong execution and implementation, I think that'll allow a speedy process for the government to offer a better service. So we've seen like the US example, for example, they have USDS, UK has its own government digital service, Singapore with its GovTech. I think in order to have all these different agencies working together, it has to have a dedicated coordination body that is high enough in politics to be able to enforce standards to other agency, but also has the kind of operational talents to be able to implement and develop products of its own. So it's not just creating guidelines and standards, which I think is important, but to also create the product on their own so that they could disseminate the products directly, because a lot of these common applications that are sort of listed in our e-government regulation, they don't exist at the moment. So there are a lot of confusion over whether they need to develop on their own or wait until the central government offers its one system for them to use. So without the presence of talent and dedicated agency, it is hard to sort of synchronize and harmonize the work across these different agencies. My second response to that is that government needs to be pragmatic and needs to tap onto what's hard to be refused by most of the agencies. By that, meaning looking at some use cases that could really be relevant to most of the key agencies that are at the front of digital government. I think looking at pandemic management or social assistance distribution, that requires a lot of coordination across different agencies. And making the case that are hard to review by all of these agencies, I think using that use cases with Peduli Lindungi application, for example, that has quite a good interoperability from different layers of data sources with vaccine and test results, I think sort of tap onto that kind of smaller pilots and use cases that could really show the benefits for both the citizens as users, but also across different agencies. I think that will help harmonize all these different roadmaps that are in place currently. Now, in terms of data centers, the principle is that we would want to see more integration in terms of system, platforms, and data. I don't have a strong opinion about which to take. I think each of them has their own strength and weakness, but as long as the principle is to boost interoperability and integration across different platforms and data centers, I think that's exactly what we wanted to aim for. But at the same time that the government want to provide better infrastructure, which I think is not a bad idea, I think it also has to open up with the possibility of working together with private sectors who already have a mature ecosystem in place. And this is also touching base a little bit on the issue of procurement, because one of the biggest difficulty of digital government and digital transformation at the moment is to be able to procure the right services from the private sectors at the same time when you're working with them. Currently, it's hard for smaller players to to contribute in the procurement system because we don't have modular approach. In many other countries, they do break down the project into smaller ones, so smaller vendors could also chip in and have a contribution in that. And I think number one, it makes the partnership more inclusive, but also I think it embraces innovation better, because a lot of these innovations sometimes don't come from big players, but they also come from a small teams of startups who just perhaps figure out a system of machine learning or artificial intelligence. This doesn't necessarily related to data centers, but in principle, I think when you come to be opening up the partnership to the private sectors, I think modular approach and reforms in procurement has to be considered as well. I think that'll be my quick answer to those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sima. I will continue to Ms. Lim to address the issue of data center and how other countries or other places deal with privacy and security in the digital e-governance. Please.
Yeah, but if I may, I'd also like to just like quickly comment on like the work about like silos as well. I think my colleagues brought up really good points, and we're still like that's, you know, again, that's why I'm here in Sierra Leone with my team right now. We have just kind of started to break into you know, working with government stakeholders. So we're still learning a lot as well, but we kind of started working with the ICT ministry because, you know, they were not only trying to digitalize their services, but because they were working in silos. So over the past year, you know, we've been working with them to create like a national digital development policy with all the different stakeholders, different like government departments, and really outlined like 5 pillars, like where investments were needed to transition to digital technology. So we're helping them invest in like digital infrastructure and access, digital skills, human capital development, digital government, e-commerce, financial services, emerging technologies, innovation, and digital entrepreneurship. And we really see like the benefit of like these different departments and ministries working together. Yeah, we see the benefits as being like them creating like a common language for, you know, cross-government services. So while like standards are not like the end all be all, creating that common language and finding alignment is incredibly important to like, I think, breaking down those silos. Again, collaboration, finding like what's reusable and shareable across the departments, pooling investment, particularly in like IT and digital, and how you're transitioning the government so you can render e-services to clients. So again, lots of learnings to be had like in the you know, next year, but like we're really excited to see how digital transformation is going to be looking in Sierra Leone in the next fiscal year. And then in terms of like data privacy and security, I wish I could, again, speak a little bit more specifically to government, but I can talk about some considerations that donors and nonprofits and other multilaterals have taken, and hopefully those are some lessons that can be adapted for government context as well. And I think the first one that comes to mind is just rule of thumb is just to keep the best interests of end users and citizens whose data is being collected at the forefront of planning. And I like to say, like, pretend it's your information that's being collected, and how would you like for it to be handled accordingly. Also at the beginning, you know, it's really important to define what data ownership, sovereignty, and access looks like before any data is collected or captured, and really determining in the government, like what data protection laws and regulations need to be followed, who gets to decide, who gets to do what with the data, who's allowed access, and you know, where must it be stored. I think also like risk assessments are important. You know, there's might be like unauthorized access or leakage of any stored data, and considering like what's the impact on the individuals if that information is accessed or published maliciously. So those are a few like just considerations that come to mind. You know, as we're working again here in Sierra Leone, we're taking the principles for digital development and actually having them adapted to their own like government context. So, you know, if you follow up with me next year, I can possibly give you, you know, some principles that governments are starting to use as they're starting to digitalize their services. So watch this space, and more to come. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll invite you again next year to follow up maybe.
Yes,
thank you, Ms. Lim.
Thank you.
I would continue on to Ms. Septiani to share how the data governance and the privacy is managed in Samarinda. Maybe then after, I will give one round because the time is not in our side. Sometimes always I would ask for each speaker to give 1 minute of closing remarks and maybe explore of what perhaps collaboration between Indonesia and the US, because we haven't touched upon that we can have like transfer technology and governor learning together or whatnot. So maybe in your closing remark after this, I would ask you to speak upon that. So Ms. Septiani, I give you the screen.
Baik, terima kasih Mbak Fitriani. Saya akan merespon terkait dengan isu keamanan data yang ada di Kota Samarinda. Jadi untuk di Kota Samarinda, kita menerapkan ISO 27001. Kemudian terkait dengan yang lainnya, kita sesuaikan dengan standar operasional prosedur. Jadi memang kita membuat tim, bagian-bagian tim kecil yang melakukan checklist itu semua. Bahkan pada saat kita memproduksi suatu aplikasi, itu ada tim production, kemudian juga ada tim yang memverifikasi sebelum ini di launching. Dan kemudian terkait dengan data sendiri, Pak Biondi Sima di presentasinya menyampaikan terkait dengan Perpres nomor 39 ya Pak ya. Di dalam Perpres nomor 39, Peraturan Presiden nomor 39 ini dijelaskan terkait dengan Satu Data Indonesia dan Wali Data. Di Samarinda memang berkaitan dengan data di Indonesia sendiri, sebenarnya di level nasional kita juga masih menunggu arahan dari Kementerian Komunikasi dan Informatika. Tetapi kita di Samarinda karena tuntutan keadaan dan kondisi pandemik, maka kita harus segera bergerak mengumpulkan data sebagai dasar dalam pengambilan keputusan. Lalu wali data di Samarinda sudah kita terapkan siapa yang boleh menggunakan data tersebut, siapa yang hanya boleh melihat saja, dan seperti itu udah kita atur semuanya. Jadi untuk keamanan data ini kita setiap tahunnya pun juga berkomunikasi dengan Badan Siber dan Sandi Negara untuk sertifikasinya. Jadi selalu dicek setiap tahunnya. Jadi seperti itu Bu Fitriani, tanggapan terkait dengan isu keamanan data.
Thank you so much, Ms. Septiani. Now, I want to have a short round of comments from the panelists today on how you view that the Indonesia and the US can work together on developing digital infrastructure for governance and the environment. I give the first chance for 30 seconds for Mr. Sima.
All right, maybe just to conclude and to look at how we could collaborate better moving forward. I think, first of all, Indonesia has quite a unique context because the problem that we have has always been about the volume of challenges and population and the size of the country. The number of working units, there are like over 500-ish working units with their own separate mandates sometimes. So it really is not an easy task at hand. But we've also seen that the States is also a big country, and we've seen that the system has been quite mature as well. And there are a lot of lessons learned that we could definitely share from one another. The States have had this USDS, United States Digital Service unit that I think has worked quite efficiently. And it has even started from a very small initiative, trying to invite talents from private sectors to work for a few months during sabbatical leave for the government. And then some of them end up having a long-term career for the government because they are sort of called to do that. They find their mission. And I think this kind of lessons could sort of be replicated in Indonesia as well. In West Java's case, we piloted a few of these initiatives as well. We invited or we open up space for digital talents to come in and work for a short period of time. Some of them actually work longer than the expected duration in West Java space. And I think beyond talent, the issues of security and infrastructure and how to design our own user needs, these are the elements that we could definitely have a deeper collaboration on. I'm aware that the ICT ministry has also opened up a program where they would train executive leadership program for top leaders in for the key stakeholders in digital government. But I think the size has been still too nascent and still too small. I think we definitely need more trainings and more collaboration moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Sima. Ms. Lim, please.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say that Mr. Sima is going to be hearing from me because I'm seeing a lot of opportunities for collaboration. The first one is, I'm leading the trainings for the government of Sierra Leone. So if you're interested in using principles as like a really base foundational thing to, add to like that roster in building digital capacity, let's chat. Another project that we're working on with my team is using Kenya as a case study. So we also have partners in Kenya, using that as a case study to kind of understand variables and factors that are driving digital transformation. And hopefully from that, get a very specific case study on like how Kenya is doing it, and then build like a template for, other countries to kind of like learn from and replicate and kind of put in their own lessons learned. So we are being funded by the UK FCDO, and they not only work in Kenya, they also do Brazil, South Africa. Indonesia actually happens to be one of their partner countries as well. So if this is a successful project, if we find that we are getting closer to understanding factors of digital transformation, would absolutely love to tap into, the minds of, Indonesia and like all the great ways that you guys are like upskilling your workforce and digitalizing everything. So you're just seeing kind of collaboration opportunities in action here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind words. Encouragement, Ms. Lim. I will turn to Ms. Septiani, please.
Ya, baik. Terima kasih. Menurut saya di Samarinda banyak hal yang bisa kita bangun kerjasama antara Indonesia dengan Amerika, kemudian khususnya lagi dengan pemerintah-pemerintah lokal yang ada di Indonesia. Karena kita memiliki 39 provinsi dan banyak sekali kota dan kabupaten. Tadi yang seperti disampaikan oleh Pak Biondi Sima, benar sekali dan saya sependapat, kita bisa membangun kerjasama melalui peningkatan kapasitas SDM yang ada di Indonesia, terutama kapasitas SDM yang ada di pemerintah kota ataupun kabupaten. Sebenarnya di Indonesia, untuk di Samarinda sendiri, banyak sekali orang-orang atau potensi-potensi yang bisa berkembang lebih lanjut, hanya saja butuh pelatihan dan bimbingan yang lebih intensif oleh lembaga-lembaga yang profesional dan yang memang sudah mengalami yang sudah memiliki jam terbang yang lama. Kemudian yang kedua, berkaitan dengan proyek, kita bisa melakukan proyek kerjasama yang real, misal membangun Internet of Things gitu, IoT, bagaimana mulai membangun sensor, karena di Samarinda ada salah satu bencana banjir yang sering terjadi di kota Samarinda, dan kita saat ini sedang mempelajari bagaimana kita membangun sensor agar mengetahui ketika air pada level tertentu itu sudah bisa menginformasikan kepada warga untuk bersiap-siap. Nah, jadi hal-hal yang seperti ini mungkin bisa dilakukan dikerjasamakan antara Indonesia dan Amerika. Jadi seperti itu, dan besar ini berlanjut, ada pengiriman pelatihan dan segala macam. Itu dari saya, terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Ms. Septiani, for giving a concrete project example that can be done between Indonesia and the US, especially in Samarinda. Thank you all the panelists, Mr. Sima, Ms. Lim, and Ms. Septiani, for the great discussion. And I return the screen to Krista Pryor. Thank you.
Thank you as always, Fitriani, and thank you to our esteemed panelists and participants for joining us today, and to Mullah Warman University for partnering with us on this event. We were unable to answer all of the really great questions that came through the Q&A box, but we do look forward to continuing the dialogue between Indonesia, the US, and the region as a whole on opportunities for collaboration in digital infrastructure and e-governance. We hope you'll continue staying engaged with Pacific Forum programming in the future, which you can find out about more on our website, www.pacforum.org. Please subscribe to our mailing list and follow us on social media for more updates. I'd also like to remind you of the bilingual post-event survey, which we'll share in the chat box now. We would really appreciate if you would take just a few minutes to complete it and share your feedback with us, particularly as this is the last session in our series. Thank you again to our speakers for joining us today, to Mula Warman University, and to our series partner, CSIS, especially Fitriani, as well as to the US Embassy Jakarta for making this event and the entire series possible. Goodbye.